Even the world's biggest companies aren't immune from supply chain woes, with Apple reportedly cutting its iPhone 13 output due to the chip shortage. What could this be telling us about supply and demand in the chip sector? Joining me now is Stacey Raskin, senior semiconductor analyst at Bernstein. Stacey, it's great to have you back. The simple story is, wow, the chip shortage is really bad. And the more complex story is, why is the SMH 10% off its recent highs, down for the third straight week, and below its 200-day moving average as of yesterday?
Yeah, so I mean, look, so one thing the Apple story does tell you, it does sort of bring home the extent of the shortages. Apple is probably the largest purchaser of semiconductors on the planet. They tend to get their needs fulfilled when they need them. And so if they're actually having shortages, it sort of drives that home. I'd say broadly for the sector, though, there's a real debate going on right now. This whole idea of kind of like, are we close to peak cycle versus are things going to be stronger for longer? And it's sort of funny, you know, from a fundamental standpoint, the stronger for longer has sort of been right. I mean, numbers have been really good and demand has been super strong. And frankly, I'd say it's already lasted longer than a lot of people thought. I'd say from a sentiment standpoint, however, it's the peak cycle, which has been winning out over the last several weeks. And obviously, like the semi stocks have been down. The issue is really around the sustainability of this demand. Normally what happens, and you know, we've probably talked about this on the show before. Normally what happens in periods of very strong demand when customers cannot get the parts they want is they tend to order more. It's the toilet paper situation from last year sort of writ large across the industry. And, you know, and the tighter things get, the stronger demand looks because people order even more. And so we actually don't know how much of the current demand profile, which is very, very strong, we don't know how much of it is real,
right,
and how much of it is phantom. And we're not going to know that answer for a while. But I'd say that sort of peak cycle sentiment is what's been kind of bringing the sector back.
Well, and we talked to you about a week and a half ago when you downgraded NXP because of your concern that they might be overshipping autos to 30 to 40% right now. Again, hard to tell what demand is.
We'll see
the industry, I'm sorry, absolutely, the industry, which, you know, I'm thinking about this from a macro point of view, not so much as it relates to them. But, you know, if that's true in autos, you talked about some maybe similar numbers in laptops. My question would be, are those two sectors uniquely possibly at peak or past peak? Or what would you say about other areas? You know, because and you know this, every day we bring on people who say it's stronger for longer. This, you know, they still have room to run.
But it probably depends on the end market. At least with autos and PCs, those are end markets where you can start to get a handle on it because you can get decent data on semi shipments and decent data on end market shipments, PCs or cars or whatever, and so you can do the math. There are some end markets, for example, industrial. It's not an end market; it's hundreds of end markets and, you know, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of products and hundreds of thousands of customers. There's no real good way to get a handle on that. But for auto and PCs, we can kind of get some idea. I would say at least for smartphones, you know, it's a little bit different. People have actually been worried about the opposite, that end demand for smartphones has been weak, right? And it has been. People worried about China builds and everything else. And at least there, I would say that smartphones have been weak for a while. Like, it's not new. They did not benefit from COVID. And so, you know, at least at a minimum, we don't have like some sort of massive COVID pull forward like in smartphones that has to be worked off. So I think, like, perversely, the dynamics there are maybe slightly better than some of these other end markets where demand is unarguably like off the charts, but at the same time, you can actually get evidence that semiconductor shipments, even relative to that, demand have been even stronger.
Yeah, and we have this headline from Hyundai just in the past hour or so. Their U.S. chief says the worst of the chip shortage has passed. We've heard, you know, maybe similar comments from some of the big CEOs this week. Perversely, for the rest of the market, you know, a drop in semi prices might actually be a good thing if it signals some normalization. But we always, at the same time, say it's a barometer. The way that it goes, the rest of the space goes. And prior to the pandemic, if you look at the SMH charts, they were trading at like 140, 150. So we're $100 above those levels.
I mean, look, you can look at valuations, by the way, for the sector. And I tend to look at the stocks, but you can look at any index you want. You know, semis relative to the overall S&P like are not terribly elevated. They're actually at a discount. They does tend to trade at a discount, but it was kind of normal. On an absolute basis, I'd say valuations have been elevated, but they've been elevated broadly, not just in semis. It's been sort of across the board. The issue really, though, with all these sort of valuation metrics is still like you don't actually know what the denominator is. Like, you know the P, you don't actually necessarily know the E yet. That's the controversy. Is the demand profile sustainable or not? Are estimates like too high or are they too low? We don't know, like, have a good feeling for what that E, especially on a forward basis, really ought to be yet. We're not going to know, frankly, until supply does normalize. Lead times start to pull back in. And then we'll see how much of this demand is real and how much of it isn't. And if it turns out it's all real, then it could probably be off to the races at that point again.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.